Please approve that. And we'll wait until 6:35 to start. We're just letting people in.
Great, we have a lot of people so far. John?
Okay, Celia, at 6:35, whenever you're ready.
Welcome, everybody, to tonight's Aligning Architecture with Social Change panel. That is a co-hosted event between the Yale Women in Architecture Alumni Group and the Schwarzman Center at Yale University. I am Celia Emery. I am one of the co-founders of the Yale Women in Architecture Group. And we are proud that this is our 11th event of 2020, and there are 2 more to go. So what we do is we are an inclusive network and mentoring organization. If you are an alum of the School of Architecture and you haven't joined our group, we urge you to go to our website or recommend and join our community and engage and participate. We do these panels where we reach out to alums and we ask them, or people come forward to us and they volunteer to organize panel discussions around relevant topics. And we were so pleased when Jessica Kung-Dreyfus came to us to ask if she could do a panel on social change. And very quickly, she partnered with Jennifer Newman at the Schwarzman Center at Yale. The Schwarzman Center, so everyone knows or doesn't know, was established in 2015 to foster collaboration, wellness, and belonging at Yale through a combination of dining and the arts. And the center follows Yale's commitment to diversity, inclusion, equity, and access, and its mission to champion the free exchange of ideas in an ethical and interdependent, diverse community. So in the absence of its projected 2020 and 2021 opening, the Schwarzman Center is engaging in digital programs and collaborative arts experiences geared toward audiences. So our grads and our students at the Yale School of Architecture are in fact part of the Schwarzman Center already as an arts generating community. So we're really pleased that Jessica and Jennifer have partnered for this event, and that we've partnered with the Schwarzman Center. Now, the moderators have worked tirelessly to select a very special panel of speakers who are going to share their work and their projects. But I wanted to introduce our moderators. And before I do that, I just want to pass it over to Lily for a quick conversation around just some of the Zoom protocols that we have for our meetings. Lily Agatu is our fearless leader as a student and staff at YWA, and she's been helping to organize and run this meeting. And Lily, maybe you could just mention a few things about the chat and different things about people keeping their video on and so forth.
For the chat, it's around when there's like 30 or 45 minutes left in the meeting, we'll be doing a Q&A session. So for this, you could write your questions in the chat. And if you do feel comfortable when the time comes, you could unmute yourself and ask the question yourself if you want to. But you could also, or if you have a question but don't want to ask it publicly, you could direct message it to me and I will ask on your behalf. And this will be later on in the meeting. That's pretty much it.
Good. The other thing I want to mention before we start the panel is that we are going to eventually have had done 13 programs for 2020, and we really need help programming for 2021. So we do have a year-end meeting, and please consider joining that, volunteering your time and availability to help us put together another round of great events for 2021. So with no further ado, since you're all here not to hear to me, but to hear our great people, our great panelists, I want to introduce Jessica Kung-Dreyfus, one of our moderators. Jessica Kung-Dreyfus is a global thought leader, artist, and designer. She's interdisciplinary. She has exhibited her work at international museums such as the Centrale Montmartre in Rome, the De Young in San Francisco, and she's collaborated with some of the most influential investors, inventors in the world to develop and communicate vision in built form. Her work straddles disciplines as it explores and illuminates the invisible and escapable topography between sight and psyche, body and building. Jessica is also a professional yoga teacher, an educator, a healer, an author, and a mother. Her latest creative endeavor is the launch of a book called Make Conscious, which is Make Conscious, which is a cross-disciplinary studio that merges the contemplative and the creative. And she's working on a book, Your Phenomenal World, a guidebook to consciousness for creatives. Very excited, Jessica. She received her BA cum laude in architecture from Yale and MFA from California College of the Arts. Jennifer Newman. And so Jessica, could you just wave? So we're going to hear you speak in a second, but there. Okay. Jennifer Newman, if you could just wave, introduce yourself. Jennifer Harrison Newman joined the Schwarzman Center as Associate Director in 2019. An artistic director, producer, educator, choreographer, and performance artist with over 25 years in the visual and performing arts, she has collaborated extensively with artists across disciplines throughout her career, pushing the boundaries of dance, opera, and theater. Jennifer has worked with Michael Jackson, Julie Taymor, the Radio City Rockettes, and has performed on Broadway in Saturday Night Fever and Disney's The Lion King. I want to follow her out when she goes out. She has been an artist in residence at Princeton University, Yale University, Central Connecticut State University, The Field, Mabou Mines, 651 Arts, and the Baryshnikov Art Center, and has led workshops across the United States, Sweden, South Africa, China, and Mexico. Jennifer received her BA summa cum laude from UCLA and her MFA from Yale School of Drama. We are so excited to have the two of you co-moderate our panel. Take it away, Jessica and Jennifer.
Great, thank you so much, Celia. I'll just say a quick hello to everyone. It's really my pleasure as the Associate Artistic Director of Schwarzman Center to partner with Yale Women in Architecture tonight for the discussion on aligning architecture and social change. The Schwarzman Center, as Cecilia illuminated in the beginning, is a student center and a center for the arts whose mission and values is rooted in fostering wellness, belonging, and collaboration amongst communities. Tonight's topic is especially relevant to us as we build an institution from the ground up, with the aspirations of creating more porous boundaries and less silo-ness, using interdisciplinary conversations and bridging visual, performing, and the culinary arts to do so. For us at the center, we start with listening and a desire to be changed by every interaction, whether it be with artists with whom we're engaged or by users of the space. It's a learning process. Through sessions like tonight that bring together a group of people around a topic, or by engaging with artists and thinkers over a span of time that allows for a before, during, and after approach, our pedagogy of programming, as it were, aims for deeper connections and not a one and done approach. I encourage you all to check out our new website that was just launched a couple of weeks ago, schwarzman.yale.edu, and stay in touch with us. And with that, I will hand it over to Jessica to introduce our panelists for tonight.
So thank you all so much for the opportunity to co-create this conversation with you all. And it's been a real honor the past few months to really get to know the extraordinary Yale women that are out in the world doing this work at such an urgent and critical moment in our world's history and around social change in the built environment. So what we're going to do is we have 3 panelists, each with different affiliations with Yale. And I'm going to introduce each one of them instead of all at once, each one. And then they're going to give a 10-minute presentation on a particular project that illuminates their approach to architecture aligning with social change. And so for the first panelist, we're delighted to bring in Sari Chang, who is one of the principals of JACOBSCHANG Architecture and year of 1998 Yale MArch. She is similar to Jennifer with a background in drama and has actually many different affiliations other than being an architect. Her diverse affiliations speak to her breadth of creative and life experience and community engagement, which has become critical to her ability to generate projects that are in the civic realm that maybe step outside a traditional role that an architect may have. And so in addition to being a registered architect in both New York and New Jersey, she is also a member of the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. As an actress, she's a member of the Screen Actors Guild, and she's also affiliated with the Professional Ski Instructors of America. She, before working with JACOBSCHANG, she worked for Pei Cobb Fried Partners in New York and worked on numerous projects for university campuses, including Stanford and Princeton University. Subsequently, Sari worked at Roger Marvel Architects as the project architect for Kate Spade. And for many years, she worked as a principal of her own practice, which included a range of projects that included offices, residential, and institutional work, including with Princeton University. She received her, in addition to her master's degree from Yale, she also has a bachelor's in architecture from Princeton. And all of her work currently, you could say, focuses on environmental and social impact while cultivating sustained individual, civic, and institutional relationships. And without further ado, she's going to present one of her projects.
Thank you, Jessica. Appreciate that. It's really such an honor to be here speaking to Yale Women. What a powerhouse group, and I feel really fortunate to be a part of this great legacy. I think who's going to pop up on the screen is Lily going to be doing that. Thank you, Lily. Okay, let's see if I can just get my talking points out here. So I believe we as architects and designers can have an impact in our communities. I'm going to present a design we did for a bait station in East Harlem as an example of how one can become civically engaged. There are many paths to becoming involved. One way to start in New York City is to attend your local community board meetings. Does it help to have a client? Probably. And in this case, I got involved with a civic advocacy group when a friend asked me to join the board of Esplanade Friends after she saw a design presentation I made for another community group. Among other things, Esplanade Friends organizes programming and public art projects. As you see in this map defined by the red line, the Esplanade is a long linear park along the East River. And the advocacy group wanted to serve the needs of the fishermen as well as call attention to the neglect they saw along the northern stretches of East Harlem. Next slide. All right. What is radical about this project is that the intent was to create a small amenity that would not only fulfill a need, but on a socio-political level, call attention to the lack of equity and environmental justice that has left the northern part of the East River Esplanade unsafe and undeveloped, while the areas along the river to the south have numerous renovations, either completed or in the works. That has much to do with access to public-private funding or the presence or lack of institutions bordering the Esplanade that can serve as valuable partners, and the time individuals in a community can devote to civic engagement. Next slide. Yeah, thanks, that's good. El Barrio fishermen have been requesting bait stations for decades, but few exist in the city. The fishing season spans many months, and in this location, there are often dozens of people fishing day and night who cut their bait on the benches and walkways along the Esplanade. The advocacy group recognized that the needs of the fishermen could be solved architecturally. Before design began, we interviewed fishermen and about what they wanted in a bait station. And our challenge was to negotiate a design around the sea rail while leaving enough room along the narrow path for walkers, bikers, and joggers. Next slide. El Barrio Bait Station is threaded through and tucked into the curve of the sea rail. We helped the advocacy group successfully get a grant that promotes increasing accessibility along the waterfront and designed with that intent. Ease of installation was also a factor. The bait station was built off-site and installed in just a few hours. Next slide. This is a very popular stretch for fishing at the confluence of waterways called Hellgate that bring various game fish at different seasons. The East River is actually a tidal estuary. So the design consideration included not only fulfilling program needs, but determining a material that could be tough enough to withstand, a lot of water around and resist vandalism and be low maintenance. And we chose Corten steel. Next slide. The elements that are integrated into the design are solar panels for lighting at night, non-potable water pump for cleaning surfaces, measuring device for meeting the minimum 28-inch sea bass catch, knife slots, East River fish illustrations, and orientation signage to identify the nearest street. Next slide. In this case, it's at East 100th Street. This was a prototype that we were able to get built and installed with relative ease through the Parks Department's temporary public art program. The hope after this beta phase is to have many of these stations permanently lining the edges of the waterfront. The ambitions of the project started very modestly with relationship building among an assortment of organizations. As architects, we are armed with tools to help others visualize, reflect values, and build a narrative. Next slide. I want to acknowledge the breadth of organizations and people who donated time and materials as a project that began prior to the COVID crisis and Black Lives Matter protests. It illustrates the good citizenship from groups across New York City. In many ways, the project is less about design than it is about how to get something built that can have an impact in a community. And you can see in this, there were so many people involved, but I do know someone is on here, Jessica from Community Board 11, Jessica Elliott. And I just found out she's also a Yaley. Next slide. Perhaps one of the lessons we learned was that civic architecture need not be overly large to have an outsized impact. The expectations of this project were far surpassed once it was built, and the promise of the El Barrio Bait Station has given it purpose beyond its utility. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sari.
You're welcome.
So if you have questions, you can save them or send them into the chat, and Jennifer and I will start to organize those. And then after the two other presentations, we'll open it up to a conversation between these projects. And so our next presenter, thank you, Sari. Our next presenter is Naomi Darling, who is also a graduate of the Yale School of Architecture with a master's degree. In addition to that, Naomi also has a BSc degree from Princeton in structural engineering and architectural design, and an MFA in sculpture from Monash University. And so her interdisciplinary pedagogical background really starts to, you could say, inform her approach both in practice and teaching. And in today's panel, she'll really be focusing on a project that bridges that conversation between her personal practice and how we actually bring these conversations about collaboration, social change, and interdisciplinary practice into how we teach architecture. She's the principal of Naomi Darling Architecture and a 5-college associate professor of sustainable architecture. All of her work at different scales involve environmental stewardship, social responsibility, and look at the role of architects as agents of change. Her current projects include a kayak kiosk and picnic pavilion for Sunderland, a bandshell for the town of Amherst, several residential projects, a farm stand and seed library in Thailand, and a memorial hall that includes a museum, library, and community center in Sapporo, Japan. Prior to founding her own practice, Naomi worked for Olson, Sundberg, Kundug, Allen Architects in Seattle, Studio ABK in New Haven, and Kengo Kuma and Associates in Tokyo, Japan. And today she will be presenting one of her projects with her class in Thailand. So Naomi, you want to take it from there?
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you everybody for being here. It is an honor to be speaking to this group and to be a part of this group. I've really enjoyed the sessions I've participated in this year, so thank you to everybody. Are you gonna, who's gonna show the slides? Great. So just to get started, in my work in teaching, to expand upon Jessica a little bit, I focus on sustainability and mediating the impacts of climate change. Climate change disproportionately impacts those with less, people of color, women, and children, both in the US and globally. Access to clean air, clean water, safe shelter, and the restorative value of outdoor parks and open spaces are now more important than ever. The built environment has a power to impact all of these things, both positively and negatively. And very much like the Schwarzman Center, I believe that achieving sustainability is by necessity an interdisciplinary undertaking, one that requires collaboration at all scales of implementation. This is obviously true at the global scale, but also at the scale of individual design projects. And so the case study that I'm going to show and share with you is for a seed library and market in Thailand. Next slide, please. And the project really started it was inspired by a challenge from the Roddenberry Foundation in Hampshire College for 3 different disciplines or schools to come together around issues of sustainability. One of the advantages of teaching within a small liberal arts college is the disciplinary boundaries are a little bit more porous than at larger institutions. Despite that, the course really came about through a dinner that was organized for faculty to come together with an interest in sustainability. And by the end of the dinner, we had conceived of the course uniting architecture, anthropology, and ecology. And in the 5-college consortium, the architecture program is a shared major between Hampshire College, Mount Holyoke College, and Amherst College, but students from all 5 schools are able to participate, including UMass and Smith. Next slide, please. So these are my collaborators. Sue Darlington is an anthropologist, and her research is focused on the role of religion and ritual in environmental conservation and social change. And Phinompan Sakritam Bang was also our collaborator with us for the entire fall semester. She has worked for years in community development work and on working specifically with farmers to mobilize and advocate for rice varieties and seed production. I think the most important thing about this image is the importance of relationships. This isn't a project I would have been able to undertake without the collaboration of Sue, who has a decades-long relationship with the NGO that we were working with, and with Bang, who is really part of the NGO. Next slide, please. I think the other thing I want to highlight is how interconnected so many of these issues are. You know, as architects, we might think, you know, the sustainable cities and communities is really our area of expertise, but you know, a project like this, working with farmers and seed saving and seed sharing, really touches upon poverty and hunger and well-being. And, you know, so many of these issues, you know, can come together through even a small scale project that we might all be working on. Next slide, please. The other thing that we really emphasized from the very beginning of the semester is this idea of help. You know, that we were an American college coming into non-Thailand, which is a poorest region in Thailand, mostly farmers who lived there, and really emphasizing that they were helping us through providing us with this educational opportunity. And we were, you know, hopefully sharing with them some ideas for building, but also more immediately, in some ways, increasing their social capital within Non and Thailand through our affiliation and collaboration. Next slide, please. So the organization that and project that was at the center of this course was a seed library and market for the JOCO Learning Center, started by Samroy Phadphon, whom you can see in the upper right. And you know, JOCO has worked to combat the impacts of sort of large agriculture, and Thailand's version of Monsanto is a company called CP. And so the issues that you hear about with farmers in the US, the impacts of large scale monocrop farming, the related, you know, environmental degradation, the impact on the livelihood of farmers is something that we see in Northern Thailand as well. And the mission of the JOCO Learning Center was to educate farmers about the benefits of small scale integrated organic farming. Next slide, please. And so one of the real benefits of having Bang with us is, you know, all projects are political, but she was really able to show us, you know, how this small sort of seed library and market in non-Thailand really tied into the larger social, political, economic framework. And all of the sort of people and players at play that would impact this market and how it would fit into this larger context. And so it was really invaluable having her with us in the classroom as a full partner. Next slide, please. We were lucky to be able to take students to Thailand over January so they could really meet with our collaborators in Thailand. The image on the left is a Buddhist monk doing a tree ordination. The monks in this part of Thailand have become strong environmental advocates. He's doing a tree ordination to combat deforestation, which is another one of the impacts of the large scale monocropping. And on the right, you can see us visiting a farm with one of the leadership at JOCO, where she has changed her family farm into a small integrated farm. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this is the site. There we go. So the upper left there is the site, sort of an aerial view. The lower image is the view upon entering the site. The upper right is the community center now, where many of the workshops that JACO holds are held. And where the cars are sort of along the street parked there, that was really our site. So if you go to the next page, next image. You know, one of the skills that I think we really do have as architects is we're very good at choreographing and bringing together people with different areas of expertise. You know, so we're used to working with structural engineers, mechanical engineers, and in this kind of work, you know, that increases further. And we had a day-long charrette with JACO, the leadership at JACO, the users, to listen to what their desires and needs and dreams were for this space. And then to start to translate those ideas into visual form. Next slide, please. We worked in smaller groups over the course of the day, and then at the end of the day came together as a larger group. And so our role really here was to listen, and then to, you know, maybe suggest things that they hadn't considered and to gauge their reactions. So one thing that came out of this was, you know, the program really was developed. So program ideas for cafe and gift shop emerged out of these conversations, as well as the idea that the market and seed library really could be almost a billboard for the NGO on the street and bring more people into JACO to make them aware of the educational opportunities available to them. Next image, please. So 2 of the students in that class are actually current Yale architecture students. So I'm going to share with you just very quickly their concepts. This is a project by Nicole, Shika, Zach, and Sylvia. Shika's a 3rd-year MArch student right now. Zach was a religion student and Sylvia is an ecology student. And I think you can see in their concept the impact of Sylvia's research on ecological resilience and circular farming really inspired their concepts for their projects. And then the next slide is Maya Gamble, a 1st-year student at Yale right now. And I think Maya's on this call. Erin, a Hampshire design student, and A. Boone, who is a critical race studies student. And their project was really inspired by ideas of involvement and inclusivity. Next image, please. And so here's, you know, the entire class. And so I think my main takeaways really are, and the project is continuing forward. It's on hold right now because of COVID. But, you know, social change really requires bringing together groups of people to implement the change that we want to see in our built environment, listening, and then including a diverse voices of our collaborators, and then as architects really being humble with, you know, knowing what we can bring, but knowing when we need to listen. So thank you.
Thank you, Naomi, for sharing your important work and so many things to further develop and we can discuss in the conversation. And our 3rd presenter is Colleen Murphy-Dunning with 2 of her teammates. And it's been truly, when she first told me about her project, like my whole body reacted with emotion because of the potency of this project right now. And her work really lives at an intersection that starts to bring these conversations together. So she is the director of the Urban Ecology and Urban Resources Initiative at the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. So she really lives at the intersection of the city of New Haven and Yale University. Colleen partners with faculty to lead a field-based module on urban ecology for all incoming Yale Forestry and Environmental Studies graduate students. Before she came to New Haven in 1995, so she's been in New Haven for 25 years. She taught agroforestry at the Kenya Forestry School and reviewed natural resource operations in Papua New Guinea for the Rainforest Action Network. So she's also very much been in the field. She received her BS in Public and Environmental Affairs from Indiana University and her master's in forestry from Humboldt State University. So, Colleen, would you like to start sharing the project?
Sure. First and foremost, thank you to everyone for involving us in your session tonight. I was a little nervous because I'm the only non-Yale alum to present, and I'm not an architect. So I am a woman, though, so I fit in some way. But in fact, it turns out both Naomi and Sari really focused on it, really at the intersection of the environment. And so it's an easy segue to our work. I thought I would first start with a concept that is a guiding principle in case anyone is not familiar with this idea of social forestry in our profession, which intends to create a means for local people to have a voice in the decision-making of the management of the natural resources where they live and an active role in a participant in managing those resources. So we apply that idea of social forestry in New Haven through a community greening program to manage New Haven's natural resources in a program we've led for 25 years called Community Green Space. Every year we've had hundreds, if not 1,000 volunteers each year work with our staff and our Yale interns at the Yale School of the Environment, and sometimes from the School of Architecture or Divinity or Public Health, to support the volunteers to carry out their vision, providing some material and technical resources. The ways and the priorities that the neighbors in New Haven have tackled the environmental priorities that they have identified might include restoring a vacant lot, improving a city park, planting street trees. It's whatever that group who comes together identifies as a priority of what they hope to achieve, and they do the work themselves. I'd say that as they come together and identify a shared purpose, it's often simply beautification in their neighborhood or a safe place for their children to play. I would say are the kind of the most common reasons neighbors come together to do some restoration in the landscape. The project we want to share tonight intends to use the creation of a botanical garden of healing as a real vehicle for social change. And it's one that we've been working on for several years, and it's such a powerful project that it's wonderful to be able to give it through this event tonight to raise the profile of this work. Since all social change and social forestry is really accomplished only through collaboration, I'm grateful to all the organizers who were willing to work with us with this idea that I wouldn't be presenting alone, but rather that we would be presenting as a team. I want to point out we don't have our full team. The City of New Haven is a partner and they're not with us tonight. And Julia, just want to give a shout out, is in the house on the Zoom. We saw her. But I am joined tonight by Marlene Miller-Pratt, who is a volunteer and is the visionary behind this project and is the group leader. And it is our work in support in providing material and technical resources to her and the rest of her group to carry out their vision. And I'm also joined by Marissa Mead from Svigals, who is an architect. So we do have an architect when we recognized early on that we needed the expertise from this field to help achieve the vision that Marlene and her co-partners and volunteers seek to achieve. So I want to maybe pass with if we could start the slide deck. And I'm going to ask, because this really is Marlene's vision, that she get us started if we could go to the next slide, that she get us started with her vision of how to carry out the project.
Okay, you may look at this design and say, oh, I know an architect didn't design that. But actually, this was a high school student. And what happened was I was coming home and I saw yellow tape and I saw someone lying on the ground, and I asked someone what happened, and they said another person was shot and killed. And I looked at that and I said, this can't be the mindset of people when they look at gun violence. Now, gun violence is a problem here in New Haven, but it's a problem everywhere in the United States. It's something that has risen and something that needs to be addressed. In this picture here, I asked one of my students, I said, look, I need a garden. I need somewhere where all mothers can go and feel healing. I said, I want a tree of life. And I want the tree of life in the middle of the garden. I want bricks. I want these bricks to represent a walkway. And on every brick, I want the name of an individual that has lost their life and has fallen to gun violence to be listed on these bricks. I do not want these children to be forgotten. I asked him also, I said, look, I need lots of plants. I want it to be beautiful. I want lots of plants and trees. And when I went to Urban Resource Initiatives, she asked me, Colleen asked me, do you want me to plant you a tree in honor of your child? And I said, no, I want a garden. I want something that's beautiful that every mother could go in and remember their child. And looking at that, what I did was I went, after going to her, I looked at, sorry for that. I looked at the idea that, okay, we're going to look at something where we can have something serene, something that's tranquil, something that we can go in and remember our children versus going to a cemetery. Because when you go to the cemetery, you're reminded of the tragedy. So this is something that we wanted, and got together with some of the mothers after going to Urban Resource Initiatives. And she said, well, I never took on a project like this, but I am going to go for this. We are going to go for this. You don't want one tree, you want something big. And we're going to support this because we know that the city needs healing. We know that people need healing. And so this is where we began.
Next slide. And we're going to pass to Marissa to describe the next step in the process.
So I'm Marissa from Spiegel Plus Partners. I think one of the reasons that Colleen had approached our firm is because we had previously worked with the school district in Newtown, Connecticut to build the new Sandy Hook School. So, and Julia McFadden, who's also on this call, was very instrumental in that project and developing a process to hear the stories from the community before any drawings or designs were put down on paper. So one of the first things when we first met with the group was to acknowledge the importance of the process, the importance of the design process, past, present, and future, and the participation in that process. One of the very first things we did was to sort of help the team visualize all the work that had already been done, because by the time they came to us, they had been working on this project for almost a year. And so to sort of put a presentation together and play that back to them, I think was really meaningful. And then going into the design process, we knew we would have many, many meetings with the group of mothers, but also in sort of these ever increasing circles of influence. So we had many meetings with the mothers to define their aspirations, what they really needed out of this garden. And that's when we heard about, this serene place, this natural place, not a cemetery. And they wanted people to come and instantly recognize the magnitude of the problem of gun violence in New Haven. And it also provides a sort of a physical touchstone, a place that's the center of some other initiatives that the mothers are working on in the community, including education initiatives and inspiring others to go out and make change. And then we also knew that there would be opportunities all throughout the process for people in the community to get involved. So there was, sure, yeah, we can go to the next slide. So this is a community presentation. This was open to the public. So again, going back to the idea of the ever increasing circles of influence, we had the mothers group, then a steering committee, which included community leaders, representative from the police department, siblings, friends, folks who just wanted to come and share their story. And this was vitally important for us as the designers to hear all of these stories, because it makes the project more meaningful. It makes our job easier because we're truly not just hearing the stories, but understanding the problem. And then it was also, it's important for them to share their stories and hear from one another. It's an opportunity for sharing and healing in that process. And then the biggest circle is this public presentation where we bring the idea out to the public, let all the neighbors know what's going on, make people feel included in the idea, in the process, before anything is put down on paper and feels concrete. So all of that happened before any design was created. And now the process has, those circles of influence have expanded even further with people coming out. Firemen stop by to help water plants.
Maybe,
Next
maybe we
slide.
could ask for the next slide.
Next
Yeah,
slide.
next slide, please.
There it is.
Yeah, so yeah, you can see here, this is work at the site itself, really leading into the site. And it brings me back to my earlier point of it's not only having a decision-making voice, but an active voice in the creation of the place. So you can see in these images, many of the moms who have been involved, and also neighbors who live nearby are involved in the project. And that's also critically important, as one of the early locations where the moms initially thought they might like to site the garden. There was actually not a reception by the neighborhood. So through these plantings, it's been a way for the parents to have a sense of ownership and control over the creation of this space, but also for the neighbors to be involved. And firefighters come with water, so that's critically important for watering the plants. Could we have the next slide, please? Do you want to?
You could do it.
So this is you can see the groundbreaking ceremony last spring, and with Marlene and many other mothers joining her in the groundbreaking of the actual site for the construction of the Botanical Garden of Healing. And you can't see very well in the background, but there is someone behind Marlene and myself holding a large sign, which we actually have right here in my house as well. And we're just gonna, Marlene, I don't know if you guys can see this, but to give you a sense of the magnitude of this problem, these are just some of the names of the victims of gun violence in New Haven. And to think about how many families' lives have been touched by this problem just in New Haven, let alone in our country. And by having these signs at the dedication with so many family members coming up to look for the name of someone that they loved, that they lost, was really powerful in building support for the program. And we know we'll be similarly like this when we have the names and ages of the victims on what Marissa and her team have named the Magnitude Pathway.
Where is this site?
It's on Valley Street in,
Thank you.
if you know what the kind of West Rock neighborhood, West Rock is kind of in the background of the space. Maybe we can look at the next slide and Marissa can walk us through the space. There's West Rock.
Yeah, so West Rock is a prominent feature in the site. It's really a stunning location. So the team and the city had already chosen this particular spot when we were brought on. And after we'd gone through a very robust collaboration process with the community, we began to put some designs down on paper to get feedback from the mothers. In the final design, some of the things that really remained true to Marlene's original sketch, her student sketch, were the tree of life and the engraved bricks. And those are really prominent elements in the site. If we could go to the next slide. You can see a little bit more here. So you enter the site either from the left or the right along Valley Street. But the first thing you encounter are some wind chimes that sort of set the tone for this site being a sacred space. Valley Street is fairly well traveled. It can be a little bit noisy. And so having those wind chimes immediately when you enter the garden helps to set a tone of quiet and peace and serenity. There's also a stream on the back side of the site that does provide a little bit of a natural ambiance that's really quite lovely. The design is really, it's a very gentle landscape approach with sort of meaningful elements interspersed. So the walkways, which we term the Magnitude Pathway, have the engraved bricks. There is one brick for every individual lost to gun violence from 1976 to now. So we are currently adding more bricks as there are more deaths in 2020. There are gardens, of course. Gardens have been very important right from the beginning. The mothers want an opportunity to be on site every season, to replant and to tend. It's a labor of love for their children. It's a gift to their children. And so participating in that labor, I think, is really important. In the heart of the garden, so sort of on the upper left-hand side of the screen, is where the Tree of Life is located. And on the back side of that is a memory wall with tiles engraved with phrases from the mothers that were important to them and that might apply to anybody who comes to visit the site and wants to remember a loved one. Things like, he was looking forward to going to college, or she loved to laugh, or he was really important in the community. She loved to dance. So it was important to have that be relatable to anybody who's feeling a sense of loss. In the center of the garden, in the largest grassy area, is a perspective sculpture called Lost Generation. One of the things that Marlene relayed to us early on is that she and her friends have lost so many children and friends of their children that it really feels like an almost gutting of their community. But it's not just those individuals who were lost, it's also their future families who were lost. So it's an entire lineage that's cut out from these communities. And that really impacted, I think, everybody who has been involved in this project. And so the perspective piece in the middle there responds to that idea that our families are fragile, but that together we can bring a strength to make change in this problem.
So when you look at this particular image, can you go back to it? Where is it?
Oh.
All right. Anyway, when you look at that particular image, as she mentioned, each one of the bricks will have the name of one of the individuals that you see on the board. There will be a date band there, and that date band will separate the names from the years. So are we over time? Oh,
It's okay.
if I could just finish. Okay, that date band will separate the list that each one, some of them are wide, 34 children lost that year, some were small. As you walk down that walkway, we are hoping that people will look at the fact that this is too many lives lost and that we need to do something about it. We need to pick up big brother, big sister programs. We need to get mentorships going on. And walking in and looking at the sculpture is actually in metal pieces. So as you look at the metal pieces, you will see a family situation. They're cut so that you see a stenciled like family in the sculpture. As you get closer to the sculpture, all you see is metal. That family structure has disappeared. And then when you get back to the Tree of Life, that family you see again in that sculpture. The purpose of that sculpture is so that as you walk through that garden and you see the family, when you lose sight of that family, that shows how gun violence has destroyed a whole family. It didn't just take away that person, it destroyed that whole mindset of their children and children to come. As you get back, then you see that they live again. One of the things that I hope that people take away from this whole project is that when you lose a child or you lose a family member to gun violence, generations cease to exist. Anybody that comes after them, they're no longer. In doing this garden, it gave mothers hope. When you get that phone call saying that your child has been shot and killed, you feel hopeless. There's nothing you can do. You can't bring them back. But doing this garden has given us one more thing. It has given us the hope that we thought we didn't have, because it gave us one more thing that we could do for our children, and that was remembering them in this garden, this beautiful, tranquil place, and keeping their memory alive forever. So that was the purpose of really bringing this in, so every family could go in there and feel healing. Not just someone who lost their life to gun violence, but somebody might want to go in there and just read a book. Somebody might be dealing with a family member that's suffering from cancer and want to go somewhere peaceful and think about it. You know, it's not just for victims of gun violence, it's for anybody who's seeking healing.
I'm sorry we went over time, but I think you can appreciate why we thought it was very important that Marlene and Marissa share so much about the importance of this work. So forgive us for going a little long.
You're forgiven. It was engineered for you to go over. And I'm moved every time I hear you speak about this work, and it couldn't, I mean, this is, I can't even, the emotions of your work are so potent. And thank you.
Jessica, we all feel this way, and we're so inspired and at the strength of Marlene and the other mothers who have gone through what's unthinkable, and yet they have a bigger vision. And that's where, like, of any project I've done in my 25 years, the social change that is needed in our country and what they represent is so inspiring that we're just grateful to be part of it.
And as I respond to your work and your emotions and the potency of your coming together with this project, I feel a renewed faith in architecture. And I think that's part of this conversation, which is how we can look at how this piece that you're doing can restore our faith in how the built environment can really help heal our societies, right? And so as I try and get this prompt out so that 3 panelists can discuss, there's an invisible 4th panelist, which I've been discussing this work with, and he's someone that's brought many of us to this work and together. So I actually met Naomi at his retirement party last year, but I've been sharing all of your work with Professor Bloomer, who just retired from Yale, and I was talking to him about Sari's work and Naomi's work, and also your work, the Botanical Healing Garden. And he, of course, was talking about the potency of architectural ornament as a strategy for telling these stories that need to be told, and as a story of healing. So I was going to read one of his sentences in his email, maybe as something that can start your responses to each other. And so we were conversing, and I wrote, perhaps the role of architectural ornament or sculptural forms, which each of you engage, involves a reintroduction of the story of the place through the edge condition, which is necessary to create architecture that's able to respond to social conditions. And he wrote in response that ornament or architectural forms that are sculptural reveal a world, a story, a cosmos, essentially an edge world. And he wrote, like a beach between land and sea, the architecture does not become alone in the middle of the ocean or the prairie. Its reality is being every place at once. It reveals a world, a diverse universe. So with that, with his words, how would the 3 of you just respond to what's been shared?
Um,
Does she mean the 3 of us?
Oh no, all of you, Naomi, Colleen,
Yeah,
Sari. So we're going to open it up to the panelists.
I mean,
And,
I think what pulls all 3 projects together is that they're grounded by the communities that love them, right? Just feel so much passion and love. And I think that we are just there to help them express that feeling and sort of bring it to life. And I think it's so potently felt in the garden.
Beautifully said.
Yeah, and I think one thing to add to that is a lot of times we think of the design process as being a moment and almost like an edge. And in this case, really it became so important that the design process is continual. This is a living project. Bricks are going to be added. The garden is going to be tended. And so what did you
I was saying, hopefully not.
Yeah. And so the design isn't a moment. It's very much a process. It's about the relationships, nurturing those relationships, engaging one another, And so I think, yeah, for me, this project really drove home the idea that architects need to provide room for that process.
I might just kind of add and to connect to your work, Naomi, about how you described your students working in Thailand and learning from the community. I think that whether it's architecture or forestry, whatever profession we bring to the table and whatever expertise, that humility to know that social change and the work that where we can be most effective, whether it's for sustainability or other goals of social change, is really about learning from each other. And it's really about collaborating. And so much I've learned from our architecture colleagues and from Marlene and the mothers. And it's something, another wise professor, not Kent Bloomer, who is also wise, but Professor Bill Birch described as the mutual pathway of learning. We have something as professionals to offer, certain technical ideas and skills, but we also have a lot to learn from our community about what they understand and what change is needed, and giving them the tools to go from the original design that the high school student who Marlene got to make this drawing to the more technical drawings that really captured and articulated the vision and to the installation. But it really is, it's about learning from each other and working together. And so, yeah, I think that is something, Naomi, you pointed out so clearly in your work that I think is true in our example and in Sari's work too.
Yeah, and then to follow up on that, and just, I think we all talked about the processes that we underwent through our projects, our collaborations, but also just the timeline of all of these projects began really much before our own involvement. In some ways, JACO's beginning was, much before I got involved, and same, before Marissa became involved as the architect. The project was really quite far along in terms of its conception. So this process, often the timeline extends before our own involvement, and then hopefully continues. Our work, we're sort of coming in at a moment in time as architects, and we're privileged to collaborate and learn from so many people who are doing so much social change around us. And then the project is hopefully continue and have a life, after we leave. And that's really what I think is also very exciting about the work that, we're able to do.
I think that's what's so sacred about working in the public domain and the public sphere, is that not only are you creating it, you're creating sacred moments, sacred space. I think of it so much with the mothers. But it's really embracing not just the object, the park, or the object being a market, or the object being a fishing base station. It's the world that it creates around it, and the conversations that come afterwards, and that people start to identify with that placemaking. So it becomes about that human spirit that just brings an evolution that I think that's what elevates it. And too often in architecture school, we're taught to think the building is the end game. And in fact, when we look at social space and public space, it's really about what happens and allowing it to sort of the texture of life to just happen around it.
One of the gentlemen who walked in the garden to look around, he is a middle school principal. And while he was walking through the garden and looking at the bricks, he went to 1980 and he pointed to a brick, and he said, "That young man on that brick is my dad." He said, "And I was 5 years old when my dad was shot and killed." He said, "Now I have somewhere beautiful to bring my children, who are now young children." He said, when they're 8 and 9 years old, I think he said his children were 2 and 3, and say to them, "This is the reason why you are growing up without a grandfather. I want you to grow up and be part of the change that this world needs. Thought it was wonderful.
Yeah. Amen.
So if you would like to ask a question to the panelists, you can enter it into the chat, or if you want to unmute and speak, you can also do that.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Awesome. I am at the Yale Divinity School, so not the architecture school, the Institute of Sacred Music. And I just wanted to say thank you all so much. I was so moved by your projects. The specific project that Colleen and your associates that you mentioned, I studied, I have a background in American Studies, a class in Indigenous archaeology, which kind of like approaches archaeology from the perspective of the individuals who are actually involved with objects that they don't really get to be involved with. So Native Americans who don't actually ever get to deal with like NAGPRA or anything like that. So I'm really moved by involving the mothers and other individuals who've been affected by gun violence into this design process. And I'm interested in hearing what were some of the other ways in which these mothers had feedback for you all. So there's the high schooler, and I love her design. It's beautiful, but what were some of the other implementations? Maybe I missed them. Or ways in which they were saying, oh, maybe you should do this, and something that you took into consideration as well.
Do you want to do it or me? All right, one of the, we had one mother who wanted sound, and she wanted wind chimes. And she said, I want to walk in and I want to hear the wind chimes, you know, and knowing that the wind chimes, knowing that I hear these wind chimes, I know that the wind is blowing. I know there's life moving. Another mother, as we were planning, the fire department was trying to put in everything. They wanted to help us because we were women, they were men, and they were trying to help us. And when the mother said, no, I'm planning that particular plant. And when she picked up that plant to put it in the ground, she raised it up in the air and said, Tamar, this is for you. This plant, every time I come to this garden, this plant will represent you. And every one of us looked at it and we did the same thing. So we know which plant is going to represent our children. That sculpture, Marissa brought the sculpture. We talked about different types of sculptures, and we were talking about this family setting. And when she brought it to us from the Mandela captivity site, and so of course I went there to look at it. And when I saw that the sculpture was going to represent a different image, the mothers and I came together and discussed that, because we were looking at all the different, I think at first we were looking like a statue, but the sculpture definitely was perfect because it represented that family that was torn apart. We look at the children of who are now working in the garden, the children of deceased, their brothers and sisters are out there working, and we look at them, and now they're developing a support group. You know, they didn't know each other, but coming to the garden now and working for their parents or for their brothers and sisters. Now they have a support group, and knowing that they're not alone, and they can ask each other, well, how are you coping with this? Or how are you coping with that? It's just so many other things that are coming out of it. The area where the Tree of Life is, we have it in like a lecture hall. So it will be an area where conversation can be made, and hopefully trying to work on a curriculum. I'm a teacher, and I'm trying to work on a curriculum now to put into the school systems so that they're talking about social justice and goal setting and gang violence and saying no. And once they put that curriculum into the school system, their culminating activity will be to go to the garden and see where you don't want to be.
Yeah, and I would add to both to Molly's question and to Melissa, I think we should be clear that when we're working with a community and working with a client and working in that sort of collaborative engagement process, we're not asking them to come up with physical solutions. We're not asking for things that they would physically want on site. We're asking for aspirations and feelings. And so, the mothers relayed to us that they wanted to hear the birds chirping, they wanted to hear the water, they wanted sound. They wanted it to some of the things at first seemed at odds with one another, like the mothers wanted the site to feel very safe and visually open, but also didn't want to have large grassy areas that would encourage gatherings or loud events. And so taking those aspirations and feelings, then as a sort of a design team, a very small set of designers, we go into a phase of creating the physical solutions. And we came up with about 6 or 7 concepts that were presented to the small group, the most important group, the mothers.
The nucleus group.
The nucleus. And it was pretty clear right away what was hitting home. And then some elements of other schemes were woven in and then developed. But yeah, I think it's always really important for architects to remember that we're not asking for the community to provide design. We're asking them to provide stories, aspirations, and feelings.
I love how the natural outcome, though, was that you created your own new rituals in the space. When you raised the plants, that was such a natural and authentic moment that just seemed so impromptu and beautiful.
Really, I think that's the power of public spaces where we can all gather. And I think that's something we're all missing right now with this period that we're living in. But, when we create spaces that invite the public to come in, whether it's, a healing garden, as you've described, or, on the Esplanade with the bait stations, or, a seed library, it's bringing people together around shared interests where they can become and build and expand upon their communities.
And I think sometimes it's not about enjoying the beauty of a space. I think radical, I'll use again the word, because it's calling attention to what's not being built, what should be built in a community, particularly along the East River Esplanade next to Spanish Harlem. Nothing's happening. And I think we would love for that to become some place that people would be drawn to and have those same beautiful human experiences, but it's just not happening right now. So that's I hesitate to say crime of it, but it's the neglect that the city and whoever the powers may be cannot bring to bear on a particular community.
I think it is a crime. I think it is unjust. I think it's an example like the redlining of the past, where there's a failure to invest in some communities.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think by coming together, that's a kind of social change to demand that there be, whether it's good ornament or high quality design, it should not be only in Central Park or in wealthy areas.
Mm-hmm.
Sari, I love your story. I'm not an architect. I'm a senior citizen. I'm a new resident of New Haven. I can't wait to find the park where Valley Street. I will look it up, but I can't wait to get down to the East River because I'm drawn to fishing. I love to see fishermen on the side of the road fishing for whatever. And I think what you've done in that small way is such a big, it's a big help. It's a big gift for those few people in that one area that need attention. Yeah. And that's what you've all brought to a lot of people. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Sam.
So to follow up on your question, on your beautiful comment, Sally, Megan asked earlier about the approval process of the bait station. Sorry. So I know that when we discussed, one of the things I was really impressed by is how you really didn't stay in your lane as an architect and really brought in other roles as like civic leader. Yeah. And so if you could speak about, if you can respond to Megan's question, also speak a little bit about that.
I almost feel like it's civic conversationalist. I think you want to be able to engage with the community, not as the person who's going to tell everyone what to do, which I guess we associate with leadership, but being able to sort of really galvanize a community of people, and like we've all said, listen a lot. And I think what's so cool is engage in a community of people that you would never normally engage with. So the fishermen, I would hang out with them and talk to them while their poles were all lined up against the rail. And I loved that. And I felt like this is work. This is just the best thing. And I think at the next stage, after sort of engaging with that community, it often goes to community board. And at that community board, you begin to present ideas. Again, I think similar to what Colleen's team was discussing, is not necessarily going immediately with an object or an idea, but to start to feel out, would you be open to this idea? Would you support it? So I think sometimes you just need support before you begin the design work. And that's another sometimes major stumbling block, is that people want to make sure, the community wants to make sure they're not being railroaded. So they don't want to be railroaded with a design or an objective. They want to have a voice. And I think it's being able to open up those opportunities for conversation wherever you are in the community.
So let's see, we have 10 minutes left. So any final questions or comments from the audience to the panelists?
I also, oh, I'm sorry. So is there someone speaking? I thought it might be nice to hear too, if there was like lessons learned that you might all want to just offer up for anyone who might be interested in doing this work, sort of best practices, as it were, as you discovered through the process of working with community, bubbling up ideas and getting it to actual design. And there are any things you all learned that you would just recommend or wanting to sort of underscore?
I guess one small contribution I would offer is, you might feel like you're taking a big risk. And I certainly had some fear that, would we be able to really support the vision of such an important project and really be able to complete it. So I was I was so sure that we needed to do this work, even though I didn't know how we would do it. I didn't know how we were going to be able to carry it out, but just having faith in, when you know of something that's so important, that you will enlarge in the circle and bring in the support you need to carry it out.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that leap of faith into a kind of unknown territory, we're not used to doing that as architects. We often like to look at the structure. We know but you don't really know what you're going into before you get into it. And it's part of that, I think, that enchanting feeling of discovery when you're just exploring, and you have no idea if you can even come up with a design that will solve any problems. And you just go in and start to make inroads with the people that count. So.
I think for the process, that we went through in the class with generating ideas, the very initial phase where the students were really working together on developing their big ideas and developing physical models that weren't architecture models necessarily, but more idea models, but they were three-dimensional, and they were using paper, and they were using maybe wood or string, but these sort of three-dimensional collaborations that were very interdisciplinary, that had ideas embedded with them, were a really important sort of jumping off point to get to the more architecture. So that was a really, I think, important, sort of early design phase that really was able to incorporate the non-architects in the room in developing, the beginning of the projects.
Most of it is really non-architectural, wouldn't you say? I think that's the gist of it.
Maybe, but you know how they say it's good to have friends in high places. I think it's good to have architect friends. And we're really fortunate that we had our team and our friends that helped us make this happen. If anybody is in New Haven and wants to visit, it's still under construction, but you can email us at uri@yale.edu and we can let you know when it's safe to come out and visit. But do you want to tell about the family preview?
Okay, what we're also doing is we're looking at, well, we have the fence around it right now where we're still doing the construction. And we're looking at like November 14th, because we'll have pretty much everything in except for a lot of the planting is bringing in just the families, and that can be mom, dad, sister, brothers, anyone. But with COVID, of course, we're only going to bring them in like 2, 3, 4 families at a time. What we were going to do is the nucleus group, the moms, I teach science, I'm calling the group the nucleus group. So the nucleus group, what we were going to actually do was bring in the families and kind of point out the key parts of the garden and then just walk away. Because what we noticed is that when the tree of life was put in the ground and we covered it, again, it was that moment we dedicated the tree of life back to our children. And when we dedicated that tree back, I stood back and I watched everyone that was out there, and everyone walked away in their own prospective places. Some were at the bricks, some went down the walkway, some were looking at the magnitude wall, which had all the quotes. And I noticed, I said, everybody is in their own element right now. And I know that's how the garden is going to be. It was a vision. And if you believe in God, I do. And I said, this is a vision that he gave to me. And he said, Marlene, you get it executed, because we need peace and healing in this world, and especially in that city.
Thank you all so much for those lessons and for sharing all of your projects. Jennifer, Celia, did you want to make any closing remarks from the Schwarzman Center? Or
Can I add one more thing? I know Lily was going to
oh,
put,
sorry.
she was going to put a link to a video that was made by actually Jessica Elliott, who is on this call. And she is, she's a member of Community Board 11 and a leader in that group. And she put together this beautiful video that I think everybody should see, because it really speaks clearly to the needs of this particular area in East Harlem along the waterfront.
I would love to say something quickly. I am, my name is Melissa Del Vecchio, and I was actually one of the architects that led the team for the Schwarzman Center design. And we did a lot of community engagement with the Yale community to think about the kinds of events that could happen in that building, and the kinds of events like tonight that could engage, not only Yale students, but Yale alumni, people from New Haven. And I'm just so happy to see, I'm sitting here smiling off camera, just watching the thing that we talked about so many years ago with those community groups come together and come to life. And I really appreciate such thoughtful presentations, and seeing so many women on the screen making these presentations. And I just it's so exciting for me to see the start of this. I'm sorry you're not all actually able to use the building yet. We're getting there. But I just wanted to say how exciting this was for me personally. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just do a quick final message for me. Thank you, Melissa. That's just the perfect volley for me. Yeah, in the ideal world, we would have all been at the Schwarzman Center together around a big table of food. But I'm so thankful to Jessica for bringing Schwarzman Center together with Yale Women in Architecture for this session. It really is such an emblematic example of what we want to do and will continue to do at the Schwarzman Center. These topics, the panelists, you all have done such an incredible job, and the work that you're doing is so inspiring and really right in alignment with what the work we all hope to continue to do. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time tonight, and everyone for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, part of our mission is to promote excellence and equity in the field of architecture. And I can't think of 3 more interesting projects to have actually done exactly that. It is really
a great privilege for us to be able to share these projects together and to even explore what is architecture. I think that's part of kind of Sari, Colleen, and Naomi all brought up kind of questions around, is architecture only, a big building built by someone with a license, or is it something that actually gets done in different ways? And so that's kind of what our mission is. Schwarzman Center with its interdisciplinary arts mission as well. So we've really kind of hit on two major mission aspects of our groups. And it's really been a great conversation. I'm so glad to have everybody. Please check our website for other events. We've got a great panel on international practices and what it means to practice architecture in different continents coming up, and the kind of similarities and differences between how things get built in different parts of the world. Again, looking at equity, looking at inclusion, looking at being open to all different ways in which things get built. So please do join us for that conversation that Louise Braverman is going to be heading up in November. And I see she's joined the team. So Louise, maybe you could just wave. Yeah, great. So check out Louise's panel coming up in a few weeks. And thank you everybody for joining. If the panelists and moderators could please stay on, we're going to do one more photo. So everybody, everybody, goodbye. Thank you very much for joining. And we've been requested by higher ups in our group to have another photo taken. So thanks for joining, and see you at the next event.
Thank you, everybody. Also, Jennifer, will the recording be available on the Schwarzman Center website if people want to reference the projects?
Yes, we will be able to post that and share that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So the request is for Lily, you and me to go off, to go without video, so they can go. It can be just the core team. That's a request from one of the
It's
the
a request
co-chairs.
from Nicole. I'm here. Yes.
Okay.
Just so you know. And,
Nicole, I took the hit on that. You saw that.
yeah. So yeah. So hey guys, hi everyone. It was amazing. It was wonderful. And if you aren't following us on Instagram, please do, because we really would love to keep in touch with everyone and celebrate each one of you, and over time revisit these projects as well. So I was looking for a group photo for Instagram to basically celebrate and thank you guys for your work tonight, sharing everything. So I'm going to go off video, and so are Celia and Lily. And then
if you could get all three of you forward as much as possible.
Okay,
Did I
Colleen.
go off?
I think you have to
I think
bend
I'm
it.
too close.
I think you have to
Yeah,
bend it. Bend it that way.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna
Come
go
on,
off.
Jennifer, you stay on.
Oh, okay.
And Nicole will be taking it.
oh no, I'm not taking it.
Oh, okay.
No.
Wait, you guys.
All right. So, but Lily, do you see the
Okay.
setting to hide everyone who's not on video?
Oh, okay.
So hide the non-video participants, and then your
All right.
screen will just be the panelist, and then you can screen capture that,
Yes.
and moderators. Awesome.
We had this problem last time. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. Great.
Yay.
Yay.
Colleen,
Great.
Thank you all. That was
Colleen,
really
thanks
awesome.
for
That was
doing
so
this.
great.
Nice.
It was really
Colleen,
fun.
I'm so glad. And I'm going to have to tell Darren that I met you.
Yes,
But
tell him.
how impromptu was that? I just talked to him. I said, "Can you give me a person?" And that was the perfect idea.
Tell
I mean,
him, tell him we say thank you and that I miss him. And when you said, do you remember? It's like, oh yeah, I was, I think I was 27 or 20. I was a kid,
and I was on the call with Jessica, and I said, I'm going to find somebody who's going to be just the right person. And I started tracking down, making calls. You were the first call, and then that was just perfect.
Yeah.
That you guys were beautiful. What a beautiful story to tell.
Well,
Thank
it's,
you.
you know, it's an awesome team,
It's
and
just-
we're with an inspirational leader, you know, Marlene, Marlene, I don't know, I just imagine in her in the classroom, but also at this plaza, she's the social change. She's gonna change the world.
Yeah,
You
Marlene.
You already
Yeah.
are. Yeah.
I mean, you were right, Colleen. We absolutely had to have Marlene
That was
there. and
that's-
That
it
was the
so great
pivotal
to hear.
moment. Thank you.
Thank you. It's from the heart. It's from the heart.
Yeah.
One of the questions that we have is we're speaking, we got this chain of command. You've got your client. I just finished a big project with the Harlem School of the Arts. And my client is Eric Pryor, who's the director. But he's actually influenced by his board and by his community and by the mothers of the children and all the rest of it. So I only get it from this point. I'm not meeting those other people so frequently. So often design has happened in this kind of remote place where you're getting those voices, but they're not coming directly. And so that was why, Marlene, it was so nice to have you there, because I know that Sari and Naomi would love to have had also side by side, the partners, the influencers and the people providing the messages, what's needed, what needs to be said. Because we can't make that up. Architects respond. We respond to those messages. We don't make them up. So I think that's what made this panel particularly powerful.
I just want to celebrate, give you guys a hug, have a glass of wine.
We're not wine.
I know wine. It's true.
Should I go get my wine?
Yeah, I need to go get my wine.
All right, speaking of that, it's 8.
Yeah.
So it's been great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
so much.
Yeah. Come to our next panel and let's, keep the conversations going. Okay, we're a networking organization. That's what we're about. So